Welcome to Spirits and Stories, a place where we slow things down and talk about the moments that shaped us. The stories behind the scars, the victories, the lessons. Every guest brings a journey. So settle in. This one's meant to be felt.
Hey, welcome to the show, Johnny. How you doing, man?
Man, I'm doing great. It's a nice Friday night. Great for the 2026. Not a great way to start off the new year.
Yeah, I agree, man. Somebody asked me yesterday. It was like 2 p.m. They're like, "You have a happy new year?" I said, "Yeah, 2026 is going great." Then what? 10 hours?
Yeah, I had to work this year.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, I worked 2 shifts, and I worked New Year's Eve and yesterday in the ER. So that's what I did. So
okay. Well, why don't we dive into a little bit of back history? I know you're a Navy veteran, and what brought you to the military, man?
You know, a lot of guys. I'm a Pat Tillman scholar, and I listen to a lot of the guys, and they're when you're reviewing their stories and listening to Pat talk about his story and how he got here. I'm 55, so my story is a little different than most. Goes, I was already out of the military when the towers fell, and so for me, my dad was a Vietnam vet. My uncles, my grandfather fought in World War II, and honestly, it was early '90s, and I was struggling to find a way, so I joined the Army National Guard first here in Oklahoma, and I was a crew chief on a Huey.
Okay.
With the first of the 245th Special Operations Aviation Battalion. It was a National Guard element for the 160th. So it was a pretty cool gig. And till we lost our special operations designator, and then we went from flying every day to a maintenance company. And I'm like, I could still do that on the farm.
Yeah.
So I went active duty Navy from there. So honestly, for me, joining the military was I needed a little direction. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had 2 friends of mine show up at my house and told me I needed to sober up, and I had just a little other direction. And so that's pretty much what, there's no profound, motivation other than this found moment. But my dad, we came from pretty poor background and stuff, and everybody I knew had done it. It had put them on a greater path. And so I was hoping they would do the same for me.
Yeah. I came in as well. Our story is real similar. I came in before 9/11. I came in 94, and I came in because I got married right out of high school and realized with marriage comes jobs and responsibilities, and all I had was a wife. I didn't have the jobs. So I came in to support my family. The ironic part is I myself did 10 years with the 160th. So that is, it's kind of ironic. You were the predecessor to the task force, and then later became the 160th Regiment. So,
yeah. So it was kind of funny as a young friend of mine. You may know him if you were with the 160th. His name is John Paul Ross.
okay,
He was, John.
yep.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, he's from my hometown here. And when me and his uncle grew up together, and he was talking about it, and he would see me and what we were doing here. We sported the first SF group mostly. That's when JRTC was still at Fort Chaffee, and John was talking about it, and so we took him down one time and showed him what we were doing, and that's how he went and made his career with the 160th. I mean, he spent the majority of his career. I think he retired as first sergeant out of the 160th. And
yeah, he was, when I left in, let's see, I was there from 2000 to 2010. I'm pretty sure he was still there when I left. Actually, when
Yeah,
did he retire?
He probably 16, maybe
Okay, yeah,
16 around there. He's got a place here in Oklahoma City called Oklahoma Tactical, and so he just teaches tactical shooting to people.
okay, yeah. I think when I left, he was actually like an E6 or an E7. He wasn't a first sergeant yet. So, but
Yeah,
yeah, it's small world,
small
man.
world.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. So you come in you came in the Navy, and what did you decide to do in the Navy? What was your corpsman?
I was a
right?
corpsman.
Yep.
Yeah, I was a corpsman.
Okay.
I had opportunity when medicine was never in my wheelhouse. I grew up farming, ranching, I could mechanicking, different things. And so we had the opportunity. I was going to school in Lawton, Oklahoma, which is where Fort Sill is. And they had a dust off unit there, and they still had Hueys. And of course, most everybody had transitioned on active duty, had transitioned to Blackhawks. And so there was very few November guys. And so they said, hey, if you guys want to go and work with this dust off unit, you can go fly with them. And it was great because I was going to school. Well, it wasn't so great for my college degree, but but it was great for me because I was flying. These guys were, all of our warrant officers, they had all served in Vietnam. Same way with the group there with the Oklahoma, with these guys could make a Huey just dance. It was just amazing what they could do with them. And so I got to flying with this dust off unit, and that was my first time to ever be exposed to medicine. And I liked it. It just intrigued me. And we lost our designator, there in 94, because I went in 95 in the Navy. So 94, we lost our designator. And so we went from having aircraft flying all the time to not, we had Delta model 47s, and then all of a sudden we didn't have it, we're very keeping anything alive to fly. So it was, and I went in and I really, being an Army guy, I was like medicine. I said, hey, what about going to, like an 18 Delta, or they had that program, and they weren't taking any National Guard people. And so I went to next door to the Navy recruiter, and he's like, yeah, come on in. You just got to go back to the boot camp stuff. And, cause you got to learn how to fight fires on the ship and all of that stuff. And it was really pretty good for me because I dried me out, and that's what it did. It wasn't hard. It wasn't difficult, other than the part that they told me I was going to Orlando, and it was January. And I said, well, that won't be too bad. It'll dry me out. I'll be in the sun. And I got the MEPS to go, and they said, no, you're going to Chicago. I'd never seen 3 foot. I'd never seen 3 foot lake effect snow.
Yeah.
And that was some of the most miserable months of my life. But
yep. Yeah, man.
It was good for me.
I did some time up there when I owned my trucking company, and it's crazy. You'll be on one side of that lake, and then as you're passing, I think it's I-80, as you're passing that lake, man, the weather will just change. It's completely different. And so, yeah, it is. Chicago is definitely not Orlando. That is for sure.
I look like that movie Cool Runnings about the Jamaican bobsled team, where the first time I just like, what the hell is this shit?
Yeah.
Anyway, it was a great thing.
Yeah. So how long were you when did you get out of the Navy?
I got out in 99, out of the Navy. We had, ended up having a bad day working for Uncle Sam, and I'm 100% now. Marines, corpsmen do, what corpsmen do for Marines, and ended up costing me my lungs and a few other things. There's a lot of bad stuff in a burning 46 and a burning Cobra. So, So 28, been pretty much retired, since I was 28.
And then when you got out, did you go directly into the medical field?
Well, when I was in, I had some really good mentors. And unlike the Army, where the 68 whiskey guys, they are made to you have to maintain your basic EMT skills, and you have to take your national certifications and stuff. The Navy doesn't do that. There's a lot of difference in training where the basic same combat medic school, the same time frame, corpsman and 68 whiskey. Well, when a corpsman graduates, they're just a quad zero, basically. I think they've changed the designators now, but you're a basic corpsman where when you get out, you're a combat medic. Well, to be a combat medic in the Navy, I'm using these terms across the board. You're an FMF corpsman or a Greenside corpsman. It's another 8-week school called Field Med Service School, or now it's called FMTB. They have one in Camp Lejeune. They have one in San Diego. Basically, it's Marine boot camp. You have one, usually E5, E6 Marine who thinks he's Gunny Hartman from Full Metal Jacket, and then you've got some corpsman who wants to be Gunny Hartman. And so, when we went through, they were still in these old open squad bays. I think they've got new barracks now, but they come through kicking the trash can down the hallway, and for a lot of Navy guys, that's a rude awakening, right?
Oh, I bet.
And so you're out learning infantry tactics, and you're learning more combat skills, but you're also learning infantry tactics. So you can fit in, and then there's more training on past that. But I had some really good mentors who said, man, if you can get these opportunities, every once in a while, they would offer classes to go out and get your civilian certifications. And I had a guy who said, man, every class they offer, whatever it is, you take it. He went on to become the MAR-4 land. He was the command master chief for all the East Coast, one of the senior command E9s in the Navy. And but he was like, man, take these classes. So I did. I kept taking, anytime someone was offered. Then I started working out on town, doing volunteer work and stuff. And so that it transferred over when I hit the ground. I had some skill sets and something, not to make a lot of money, but when I got out and went back to school, I was able to work as a lab tech and do some other things. And then I went back to school and I stayed in medicine. This is my 30th year in medicine. It's kind of bounced back. I've stayed in pre-hospital medicine. I went back, got a degree in microbiology, infectious diseases. Then I did a bioterrorism and emerging infectious disease fellowship with the NIH, focused on ag terrorism. Mm-hmm. And then I went to work for the Department of Homeland Security, the Center for Domestic Preparedness out of Anniston, Alabama. And we traveled all over the world, training people on how to respond to terrorist events. And then I worked with the State Department's anti-terrorism assistance team, worked in the Philippines, Africa, Middle East, all while trying to get into PA school. I did not get into PA school till I was 46.
Oh, wow.
So,
and you had some big jobs, man. That whole, using disease and chemical warfare. That's not futuristic stuff. That's reality. If you're trying to take on a country that's bordered by two other countries that are all allies. North America is a big continent to try to hold ground on. So
it is. It is.
It would make sense that would be the form of attacking. So yeah, you had big shoes, man. Those are big roles to play. That's for sure.
And it all stems from the same thing, is that I never said, somebody looks at my resume and they're like, it kind of looks like you took paint and just, what's that? A Pollock painting is just kind of thrown up there. But I just took a class and, here I'm working on a project now 30 years later, and I'm working with a guy that I served with 30 years ago, who's now an assistant fire chief at Disney. And I'm working with another guy that I met 10 years ago or almost 20 years ago on another project, who's an AFSOC retired, so, and in 10 years, I'm working on another project that I met it's so these different pieces, all these different things that play together. And somebody remembers, I met somebody and, I tell people, take that class no matter what it is, because you won't remember what is in that class 10 years from now. I probably won't even remember the name, but, I always say, go to the lunch with the people you're there with, or go to dinner if it's a couple nights class. And if you do that, get to know those people, build those relationships, build that community, because those where the jobs come from. That's where the next gig comes from. That's where all the cool stuff comes from, because somebody will remember you're doing something and they'll call you and say, hey, Johnny, I got this. Somebody called me one time and said, hey, do you have a passport? And I was like, yeah. And they said, hey, what are you doing for the next 2 weeks? And I'm like, well, I'm off for the next 2 weeks because I work 30 days on, usually, and 30 days off. And they said, you want to go to Mexico? And I said, to do what? They said, well, we need somebody to go down and teach epidemiology and biostatistics at this medical school in Guadalajara. And I was like, sure. Next day I'm on a plane. And so you just never know. And that turned into a 10-year gig.
Yeah.
Several times a year, I'd go down there and get good tequila and had a good time.
I bet, man. So, it sounds like you've lived a life, man, that could probably fill about 50 books. And you are now a PA. You said you did go to PA school. I assume you're now a PA?
I am, yeah. I would do pediatric emergency medicine.
Okay. Man,
it's like taking care of Marines again, except for the kids don't cry as much and they don't eat as many crayons, but the mentality is about the same.
Sounds about right, man. Most of my friends are Marines, so I either catch the butt of the jokes or they just become the butt, one or the other. So
yeah, it's funny. Kids are great. I mean, they just really are. Some days are bad. I mean, it's like anything else, but it's rewarding.
Yeah. It is one of those situations, right, where the medicine field is so broad and the benefit is, I think that's one of the branches that the military really does focus on and stays pretty close in technology wise with the civilian counterparts. Unlike an Army mechanic, we're working on stuff that's 30 years behind. So when we get out, there's that huge gap between where we were at versus what the civilian world is working with. And, having, talking to buddies of mine that were flight surgeons and flight medics and the schools that they got, man, it was pretty impressive, the stuff that they were doing, I wish more of the military was like that.
Yeah. A lot of what happened over the 20 years or 20 plus years in Afghanistan and stuff drove modern medicine. It was, a simple concept, which I got to watch. I wasn't part of, but I got to see in 97. I got to go to a program that said, why teach tactical medicine to special operation commanders and whatnot? And it was Captain Frank Butler. And Captain Butler is a physician, Navy SEAL, amazing dude.
This episode is brought to you by Barracks Media, where your online presence becomes a real asset. Barracks Media builds professional websites for podcasters, creators, authors, and small businesses who are ready to be taken seriously. not templates, not cookie-cutter pages. Real platforms built to grow with you. Whether you're launching a podcast, promoting a book, or building a brand, your website should work as hard as you do. We design sites that convert listeners into followers and followers into clients. Visit barracksmedia.com and turn your idea into a home on the web.
Amazing dude. He's an optometrist. He's an eye doc. And the first time I met him, I was getting my glasses and I'm like, here's this seal doing my eyes. And I'm like, this is kind of weird. But he was a really cool guy. And he invited me to go to that class. And that became TCCC. So he came up with this, and he wrote a paper in 1996 that became TCCC, which is what, you've been taught it. He was talking about tourniquets and how tourniquets save lives and whatnot. And we've been teaching that for years now. But so in 1997 and 98, I got to go to some classes that Captain Butler actually taught. And it's been cool to see the transformation from there to about a year ago. I've got this one resident I work with. It was his first day as a resident. It was a year ago. He comes in and his gunshot wound comes in and his kid in the arm. And, we got 2 tourniquets on trying to get it done. And we're holding it. And I grab him and I don't know where we're waiting on the surgeon. And this other dude standing there. And I'm like, I grab him and I stick his thumb in there. And they said, what? I said, hold this. I said, I got to go call that damn surgeon. I don't know where he's at. And he goes, damn surgeon standing right here. And I'm like, oh shit, sir. It was a new fellow, pediatric fellow, but he was cool enough that he's like, he said, you guys knew what you're doing. Looked like you had but where it was, we couldn't get a tourniquet on it to stop the bleeding. So we ended up walking with this kid down to the OR, but it's pretty cool to see these concepts and as they've come across. Like I said, I wasn't part of any of the training, but I just got to watch it from a distance, and it's been pretty neat to see.
Yeah. I think I do think there's just so much on the front side of medical, and now with AI, it's bringing technology to a lot of different fields. So it'll be interesting to see how the military goes up through the years and how much it does change. Let me ask you, when you decided you're going to start writing books, right? What made that decision process happen?
Well, I was at PA school, and as a Tillman scholar, I got introduced to TJ Brennan. TJ is the editor, kind of founder of the Warhorse Journal. Are you familiar with that?
I am not.
If you're not, you should be. It's called the Warhorse Journal. It's a online journal. TJ's the one who, you remember the Marines United, the big deal where they had the females, they were posting all the nude pictures and stuff of them. It was a big Marine. Yep. TJ, he was a 1-8 Marine. He fought in Fallujah. He's the one that kind of broke that story. Okay. He said they're still friends of his who won't talk to him about it, but it saved lives. And if you hear the actual story that happened, somebody was stalking somebody there on Camp Lejeune, and he was watching it, and he pushed it until, it's a really bad, when you actually hear his side of the story and what happened, you're like, man, it's a really messed up deal. And so anyway, I got to meet TJ, and one of our other scholars, she was on the board, and they were having a lot of fellow or scholars writing articles for that, but it was predominantly all post 9/11. And I had wrote a story called Haven't Seen the Last of These Marines. I'd been writing, and I sent it in, and it was the first they were like, we do post 9/11. And my article was the first article that was pre 9/11, and broke the mold or whatever, and let them start writing. Now they've got it's veterans across the spectrum, but TJ opened the door for me and let me write my first story, and talking about, writing. And so then I got picked up to be a Warhorse Writing Fellow in 2019 for combat medics and corpsmen. Got to go to Washington, D.C., the Washington Post. And so I wrote several more stories for them. So I got into writing, never, non-scientific writing.
Yeah.
And so I started my fellowship, emergency medicine fellowship. I graduated in October of 2019 from PA school. I started my emergency medicine fellowship March 1st, 2020. Of course, everybody knows what happened in March of 2020. The pandemic started, right?
Yep.
And so what a hell of a time to start. And so one of the things that my dad was a Vietnam vet, and he had died of Agent Orange cancer at 55, but he had taken me. We lost 14 guys 4 days before my 25th birthday. And at some point afterwards, he took me to a meeting with him and said, don't wait 30 years to talk about stuff, and that was kind of what I was talking about, that burning helicopter and all that stuff. And anyway, so I've stayed plugged into programs, and it's kind of my passion right now is to help healthcare workers and stuff. But anyway, my counselors and stuff, and anybody, they talk to you about writing stuff, and you need a journal and whatnot.
Yeah.
Well, Matt, as well as I do, I don't need writing the bad stuff. It doesn't do me any good.
Yeah.
I've written some of the bad stuff, and I've written, like when I wrote my article, my first one, you haven't seen the last of these Marines. If you get a chance, you can read about it. But, when my 25th birthday was at a memorial service for these Marines, and corpsman and a fellow, one of our staff sergeants from the Army, General Wilhelm was talking about, you haven't seen the last of these Marines, when you need them most, when you're wore out, you're tired, all of this stuff, you're going to look around and these guys are going to be there. Well, it was the last of my didactic training in PA school, and I was just wore out. And I had one test left. I had my emergency medicine test. Well, that was pretty much the most important test for me to want to go do an emergency medicine fellowship. And it was the next day. I come home 5 o'clock. I'd been studying. I was like, screw it. I'm done. I've had enough. I'm over it. Right. What happens. And so I walked down. It's about an eighth of a mile down to our mailbox, me and the dog. I came back up, and I don't know why it was a God thing, because it was going through all the letters, vote for me, and, other schools asking for money. And it was the Marine Corps scholarship. I still have it hanging up over here somewhere on my wall. And it said, "Dear Mr. Gilpin," and it said, "We want to thank you and tell you that Nancy West donated a very significant sum of money in your name." And man, I just lost my shit. And I'm on the floor, a grown man sitting on the floor, tears rolling down my eyes, dog, licking licked off my face. And when I write about it, you talk about, well, most guys will think, well, what's the big deal about this letter to this Nancy West? Well, one of the guys that was killed that day is a truly good friend of mine. His name was Eric Kirkland. We called him Kirk. And we had been on the 9th of May, 1996, we'd been setting on the ship USS Saipan. We'd been sitting in the galley talking about what we were going to do for my birthday. And we flew off the ship before him, and he was on this aircraft, and he was killed that night. And so in my mind, here was this letter from his mother. Nancy West was his mother. And to me, here, they always said when you needed them most, here, I got this letter and it says Nancy West. And I'm like, shit, this is Kirk talking to me. Right.
Yeah.
And so I went back and I studied till 9 a.m. or 12 p.m. And I got up at 6 a.m., went to school. My test was at 9 a.m. It was the best grade I made in PA school.
That's awesome.
So I wrote that story. And so getting back to the book, I rambled.
That's okay.
But getting back to writing, writing that. So I sat down and I started writing the good stuff and about what happens. There's a lot of dumb things that happens in the military. People do dumb shit. And it makes you laugh. There's a lot of good memories. And so I just started writing. And of course, if you've seen the book and seen the cartoons, one of my other buddies, he was a corpsman. He originally drew these. He's an amazing cartoonist. And he started drawing these cartoons back when we were at Camp Lejeune 30 years ago. And so I just took the cartoons and started drawing and using the cartoons to stories. And, there's a deal about sea stories. The difference between a sea story and a fairy tale is once upon a time is what a fairy tale starts off as. And then a sea story starts out, well, there I was. So that's how I started writing. So I just started writing good things. So I come home from work. You can't come home and tell your wife about somebody died at 7 a.m. this morning. You had to go out and tell these kids that their dad died at 7 a.m. this morning. And because they couldn't come in the hospital. So they're out in the parking lot. And then you go out, and then at 4:30 in the afternoon, you have to go back out and tell them that their mom died, So that became my outlet. It just became an outlet for me just to start writing and typing. And so I wrote the first story, and the characters in the book, I changed the names to protect the guilty. The main character in the book, his name's Stanley. It's based off an actual person. And it was kind of funny when the individual, his wife, read the book. She was like, I asked him, I said, well, what's your wife think about it? And she comes out and says, please tell me you're not Stanley. Like she knew immediately who it was about. And then I had another one of our friends call me and tell me, she goes, I'm not happy with you. Basically, summarizing our conversation, she was not happy with me because, I'm like, why are you not happy? She goes, I read the book, and she goes, I know that Sergeant Hart is Mark, her husband. And I said, yeah, that's correct. And that, and his wife, that's me. And I'm like, yes, that's correct. They're based off of you two. And she goes, I was there for those stories. And I'm like, well, yeah, you were. I said, did I get them wrong? She goes, no, you didn't get them wrong. I said, so what's the problem? She goes, well, the name you gave me in the book. And I'm like, I don't get it. What's the problem? And for anybody whose name is Tiffany out there, I apologize. But she goes, you gave me a stripper's name. And I'm like, what? She goes, that Tiffany is a stripper's name in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. And I was like, well, yeah, maybe so. And so but the writing, I wrote it for me. I'll be honest. I originally wrote it for me. But when I sent it, so he was my squad leader, who became the sergeant major for 2nd Marine Division. He wrote a section. He wrote a blurb for the book. I sent it to him, and he wrote it back about what it was like. And then another guy who was the command, I talked about, who was the command. He was the command. Him and the other guy was he was the command master chief, senior Navy enlisted, and at the same time, and then he went on to be the command master chief for Marfor Land. And then there's other people that high ranking people and enlisted and officers who read the book. that wrote great, affirmations about the book. But I sent it to my battalion commander, or not battalion commander, my battalion surgeon that I'd served with at that time. And what he wrote back, he sent me back this very great email. He didn't say one word about the book, really. What he wrote about was how he remembered his time in the military, time with us, and training. And, he went on, he's a physician. He works at Mayo Clinic. He trains with residents all. And it just, how the book made him remember that. And then also made him remember the corpsman, Brent, the corpsman that we lost, and how that Brent had given him this Cuban cigar a couple days before he got killed, and how Doc still had this cigar. It's been almost 30 years, and he still has this cigar at his hunting cabin on the mantle over his. So then it made me realize, hey, this book has done more. And, when I put it out there, of course, there's a couple people, if you look on the Amazon, there's a couple people who didn't like it, but most people, I had people coming up and say, one guy said, yeah, my kids have read the book and now they can understand the language, the jabber coming out of my mouth. I had another guy that I knew who was a Vietnam vet. He reached out to me. He said, after reading it, he said the first time in 50 years, he felt like he could talk about his military service.
Interesting.
I had another guy who had served at Quai Son and Hue with the 5th Marines as a corpsman in Vietnam, reach out to me, had me come speak in Kansas City. That's what it was interesting for me, because I wrote not about battles. I didn't write, or the dying and the dead. We lost multiple people with different things. My experience wasn't combat. My experience was all training and peacekeeping and that kind of stuff. But I wrote about the good stuff.
Yeah, I think people forget that the last 20 years wasn't all bad. And I think that's one problem that the civilians don't understand is all these stories that they hear are made up over time, because they're the small portions of what all we did while we were over there. Most of the time was trying to figure out what we're going to do to eat up time and not be focused on our families at home and everything else. So coming up with dumb games, playing dumb jokes, or, making camel spiders and scorpions fight with each other and whatever to just, kill time. And the stories that they see and they hear of the negative stuff is just glimpses of what really happened. I think a lot of people forget about the camaraderie that's built from, two people on guard duty for 12 hours at a time or whatever, it's good that there's people out there that are writing about the good stuff that happened with military veterans as well.
Yeah. When I watched Generation Kill and I read the book Generation Kill, I watched that and I laughed. I was watching me and a couple other guys, and we just laughed our asses off at, and everybody's like, why are you laughing? Because most of that show was about the stupid shit that Marines and I was like, this is real. This is realistic. This is what Marines do. Don't eat the charms. God, that's bad luck. Don't eat the charms, different stuff that, so it is realistic. And I think that's one of the things that there's a really good, Sebastian Younger, he was with the 173rd, and he was a photojournalist, and he wrote a couple of different books, but one of the books he wrote was Tribe. And of course he says, he came back home after a year with these guys, embedded with them. And, he had a hard time coming back and fitting in and whatnot. But he was talking about, he writes where he goes back to like Ben Franklin. Most people think of Ben Franklin as this old guy with getting struck by lightning and a kite and a key.
Yeah.
But he was a really badass during the French and Indian Wars and stuff. But he talked about how if people, women and kids got taken by the Indians and they didn't get them back in the first little bit, he said they would get them back, 6 months later or whatever, then they would run back. They would want to be back with the Indians. They gave them this tribal mentality, and I think that's where I don't think people crave combat. I don't think, people crave that. They crave to walk among giants. That's the way I talk about it. We had a tornado here. I'm on a disaster response team, and this town, it's a community that I've worked in many years, and it just decimated this town. And I mean, you walk through it and it's just heartbreaking. And I found myself after about 4 days, I found myself in the shower, just crushed, but I wasn't crushed because of what happened. I found myself crushed because those had been some of the 4 best days of my life in a very long time, because I was alive. And not because I was doing anything other than I was walking among giants. And I think those of you, whether you served in combat or didn't serve in combat in the military, if you ever get to walk among giants, you crave to walk among giants for the rest of your life. And that when I was there with these guys, everybody had a purpose. They had a mission. Their mission was to protect that community, to help people. Everybody had one goal in mind. And I was walking among giants again, and it was freaking amazing. I felt alive. And then I felt really bad, because to do that, all this damage had to happen.
Yeah, I think you're right. We everybody says that they would go back over again, but I don't think it's about the fighting or the combat. It's about the simplicity. You are in a group that legitimately cares about you. It's a brotherhood, and people would lay down their lives for you. And that bond and that closeness, I think brings people to the point where they realize how different it is when you're in the States. And then you take away all the outside noise. There's no, worrying about the bills. There's no worrying about, is the car running, kid going to daycare? I mean, all of that stuff is gone. It's broken down to literally get up, do your job, stay alive, wash, rinse, repeat. And, that's combat. I think that's, like you said, that's one of the things that people miss. And the fact that we're doing something and we're part of something that's so much bigger than us, any one individual. Again, you were talking about Pat Tillman, what out there, how many things out there could make somebody give up millions of dollars to put on a uniform and fight for their country? There's not a lot of things that could happen out there that would cause something like that. And, but yet it did over and over again. It wasn't just him, So I do think, like you said, those are the giants that people want to walk around, walk with, and be. So I think that makes perfect sense. When you write, right, you write in such a different style than what I did. So it's really tough. The way I do it, I struggle, especially with like the editing process and everything. With the way you write, do you have any spots where you get to and you're like, man, I'm struggling to keep the flow here or keep this moving? Do you have those same issues?
Oh yeah, every time. And I stop and there's a deal on my wall here. It says, it's Ernest Hemingway. It says, Sometimes when I start a new story and I could not get going, I would sit in front of the fire and squeeze a peel of oranges in the edge of the flame and sputter. Do not worry. You have always written before and you will always write now. It says all you have to do is write one true sentence. Write the truest sentence that you know. And so, I was taught that. And so I kind of, Hemingway is kind of one of my, to me, he is, he lived the life. He was a real deal. He's a combat, vet. He did. There's a lot of more and more I read about him, but just sit down and write, and write that. When I get stuck, I write that one true sentence. And then, of course, I wish I could write drunk and edit sober, as he says.
Don't we all?
Yeah, but that probably wouldn't go over very well. But when I write, I'm writing different things. I've been working the last 2 years. I've been working on these workbooks, so it's a little different. Now I'm getting back to writing another book again. So it's I just write. I just write what's on the paper. I just write. I sit down and write. I've got another good friend of mine. He's a Tillman scholar, former Navy corpsman. His name's Terry Weaver. And he's like, just write, and, I had another friend of mine who is he was a preacher friend of mine, and he writes, and he's a book editor and publisher for a lot of books. And he said, just get the shit on the paper. He said, just get the shit on the paper. Yeah. That's what he told me. He said, you got to get that shitty draft done, and doesn't matter. Just write, and just type, and don't make whether it makes any sense at all, and just write and then go back and edit. Just, you can figure that out. And so, and that's hard to do.
It is.
My wife has got eagle eyes. And so we kind of started this 8404 publishing. We're hoping to help grow it as time goes by, but it's more or less to give guys who want to publish their own stuff, self-publishing, that they can put an 8404 publishing stamp on it. And then it's not just Johnny Gilpin or Donald Dunn publishing, it's 8404. Right. So it's a platform is what it is.
Yeah.
And just getting stuff out there. Writing can be difficult, but I just sit down and do it when I'm ready.
Yeah. You said something that so many young writers should take into account. When the first book I wrote, and one of the things that made it so hard was I was trying to write and edit, and that is the wrong method to do it. When the ideas are flowing and the things are coming to you, you should just be writing, and like you said, not worrying about the flow and the context. And when you go back and edit, then you can worry about word choices and how to join topics together and so forth. But I just struggled with that first book because I was doing it backwards. I was trying to do it all in one and become that perfectionist, and everything has to be right and everything has to be perfect. And a lot of people, I think most veterans with their first few books, that's what comes out there. They don't want to let go of it yet because they still think that there's things that need to be fixed or things that need to be changed. And like you said, just put it on the paper, get it out there and let people read.
Sometimes I read something the other day. I was been reading the 5 a.m. Club, and it says sometimes done is better than perfect.
This show is part of the Barracks Media Network, built by veterans, creators, and storytellers who believe stories change lives. Barracks Media produces podcasts, books, and digital content that amplify voices worth hearing. We help creators launch, grow, and monetize their message without losing their soul. If you've got a story in you, or a show in your head, go to barracksmedia.com and start building something that lasts.
And, so that's getting it out there. And then the other thing about writing is reading. I still read all the time. Or sometimes I listen to audiobooks about the genres I like to read. You know, it's kind of crazy. I don't know did you read my book? Did you buy it and read it?
I have not yet.
Okay. When you read it, you're going to find that my style of writing for my book is different than my stuff on the Word, is more like a Jimmy Buffett style of writing.
Okay.
And so everybody talks about Jimmy Buffett. And of course, I spent 85 days in the Keys this last summer, and we're going back for 120 starting in May. But I grew up and, I knew who Jimmy Buffett was. I knew who Wasted Away in Margaritaville, of course, and Come Monday, but I really didn't know who Jimmy Buffett was. I didn't know this whole parrot head lifestyle.
Yeah.
And there was a little bit of that part of me that caused me to join the Navy too. Somebody gave me a book called Tales from Margaritaville, Factual Fiction and Fictional Fact. And it was his first novel that he wrote. And there was a guy in there, a cowboy by the name of Thule Mars from Heartbreak, Wyoming, who left with his horse, Mr. Twain, and found his way down to the Caribbean and to the ocean. And anyways, a book of short stories. That is how I found Jimmy Buffett. And then when I was deployed, I read his next book was Where's Joe Merchant, which is about Frank Bama, which is the character he played. If you saw him on Hawaii Five-0, he played a character called Frank Bama, so that character's from the book Where's Joe Merchant.
Okay.
And so had that book, and then his next book was called A Salty Piece of Land, which was a carryover. It was a full novel dedicated to Thule Mars. But his style of writing, of course, if you love his music, you'll love his writing. But he was one of three people to ever have a #1 New York bestseller on fiction and nonfiction at the same time. And one of those three people in that group is Hemingway and Twain and him. So he had, at the same time, he had a #1 best fiction. He's got his book, Pirate Looks at 50. It talks about his life at 50 years old and different things. And so anyway, that's how I got to know who Jimmy Buffett was, not because then I found his music. I found his writing, then I found his music. And so
that's
writing
different than most people.
It is. Yeah. And so now I've been living, I tell people Gilpin is found somewhere between Buffett and Hemingway in the book style. So, but writing is probably the most cathartic. I tell veterans you write for yourself.
Yep.
Understand the audience that you're writing for. What are you trying to do? When you sit down to write, are you writing for you? Are you writing to make $1 million? What is you trying to do? That way you're not disappointed. If you're just writing to you and whatever happens after that's great. But if you're just trying to write and get your story down, and then anything that happens after that is great. My book has become a calling card. It was a #1 bestseller for medical fiction and #1 doctors and medical humor, which is great. Now it's a great calling card. It's a great conversational starting, but just write, when you write, whatever you want to write, if you want to write about, the stuff that's giving you, keeps coming back up, great. If you want to write about your life, whatever you want to write about it. There's a lot of cool shit out there to write about.
I think people get wrapped up in thinking that if they write something, they have to share it. And, I agree with you 100% that the writing is good in multiple ways. When I wrote my first book, it was about my issues going through the military and my life. And it was literally wrote as a document to my family. I wanted to explain to them the things that I went through without having to have a conversation about it. And it wasn't even a book. My daughter convinced me to publish it. But you know, you don't have to plan on sharing it. The thing about it, the good part, especially if you, is the fact that you can write and look at it from a third person standpoint, and it will allow you to see why you made some of the decisions and realize that the things that are going on in your head aren't fact, right? You're not a piece of crap. You're not a dirtbag. You made decisions the best you could based off of the situation that you were in. And a lot of people forget about that. So there's a lot of good things that writing does for people. And the other thing you were talking about too, with the editing process and thinking that it has to be perfect. I personally, in today's world, I like to see things that have a little bit of a mistake here, there, or something, right? Because in the world of AI, I like to know that the person that wrote it was a human, and you're not going to have those little mistakes that you have from a human that AI writes. And that's where the authenticity comes from. That's the, you know, stamp of approval, the, yep, it's legit type calling card, as you said. So those are the things that I like when I'm looking for books as well. And it's just because of the unsurety of what's out there anymore. But yeah, I agree with you 100%. I'm going to move. I know we're getting to the top of the hour, but I want to move into our next segment. And this first question is I'm really looking forward to seeing what you say. If you could pick one person, alive or dead, to have dinner and a conversation with, who would you pick?
Teddy Roosevelt.
Really? I did not see that coming. What
Teddy,
made you choose him?
He's to me, you know, it would be between him and Hemingway, but I think Teddy Roosevelt to me was I have on my wall, The Man in the Arena is hanging here in my wall, talking about, you know, the man in, you know, the arena and the dirt. That's one of my big things. But the other thing that drives me and gets me in a lot of trouble is he had a saying that said, if somebody asks you to do something, you tell them, yes, sir. And then you get to figuring out how to do it. That's how I've lived my life. I've read a lot about Teddy Roosevelt. I loved his conservationist aspect, his hunting aspect. You know, if you read about him, he was a very sickly kid. Mm-hmm. And he made his own gym and, you know, made him who he was. I don't know. He wasn't, you know, he was an individual who, whether you were in a ballroom or, you know, whatnot, is great. And then I was reading in a book, I think it's Tyrannosaurus Rex, is the name of, or Theodore Rex. I think it's Theodore Rex. And it talks about one time one of the Rough Riders came to the White House, and they weren't going to let him in. And he told the guy, he said, well, shoot him next time, you know, told the Rough Rider, just go ahead and shoot him next time and come on in, you know. How he was loyal to his Rough Riders years later down, you know, and here's a guy who got shot, you know, that's why, you know, even before the whole Trump thing, you know, take Trump out of it. But here's a guy who got shot giving a speech, and he got up and still gave his speech. Yeah.
I did an article for a veteran magazine about the differences in leadership style between presidents that served in the military and the ones that didn't, right? And I think Teddy Roosevelt would have been the oddball out there. You know, most of the presidents that did not serve in the military, they cared more about the business and finance of the United States, you know, bringing in money, paying off debt, and expanding territory and building an empire. And the ones that served were more focused on giving the people a better life and taking care of the people that are serving the military and so forth, you know. And Teddy Roosevelt was the exact opposite from most of them that did not serve. He was a person for the people. You know, he made a lot of revolutionary changes to the way the manufacturing process was done. I mean, you know, he had people sitting in court that you would never think would see the day of court, you know? So yeah, he is a very interesting man. I did not see that coming from your pick, but yeah, I that would be a really good conversation. While you
And
guys
he liked to drink.
yes, he did. He did. Yep. He definitely did like his whiskey. So if you guys are at dinner, right? What are you guys having? What is the go-to meal that you guys are going to have during this conversation?
An elk steak,
Oh, wow.
baked potato, and we're gonna have rum because he talked
Okay.
about he had good rum when he was in Cuba.
Okay.
And I'm a sailor. I like rum.
Yep, absolutely, man. Well, Johnny, I'm gonna give you the opportunity to tell everybody where they can find your books and where they can follow you and all that good stuff.
Yeah, you can reach out to me at johnnygilpin.com. That's JohnnyGilpin.com. And you could just put my first name in there, Johnny, JohnNnie at, and then the johnnygilpin.com. Reach out to us. Website's getting rebuilt, but it should be up and going pretty soon.
All right. Yeah. I think everybody out there, you know, now you're getting a taste that there's more out there to choose from than just, you know, the word veteran and mental health. Those two things don't have to go together. You know, mental health is not just a veteran problem, it's a human problem. And, you know, not everything that they did in the military has always been combat or war. And, you know, the people that served are people, and the stories that we do are a little bit on the extreme. So, you know, a book like that Johnny writes is going to be a good alternative to all the negative and trauma fed rhetoric that's out there. So I want everybody to go out there, make sure you follow him and pick up a book, and you know, I guarantee you will not regret it. So I hope all of y'all have a great day. Don't forget, don't let the day kick your ass. Kick the day's ass.